Well, first of all, this morning's images, it's like we're watching Auschwitz on TikTok, you know. Had there been YouTube and Instagram and TikTok around Auschwitz, this is what we would have seen. People burning alive. And it's beyond horrendous. It's beyond comprehension. And as to your statement about you thought that it would end at some point, actually it's the other way around. When people like this are empowered and encouraged and allowed and supported and perpetrating their horrors, they get more crazy, they get more cruel, they get more remorseless, more relentless, more ruthless. That's what happened to the Nazis. The Nazis did not start off with gas chambers, but then they started killing their mentally ill people in gas vans. Then they started shooting Jews in Eastern Europe. And then they ended up with the gas chambers of Auschwitz. So it's a progression of madness and cruelty that's almost inevitable on the part of the perpetrator. And especially when it's encouraged by all the imperial powers. If people don't look at their own history, why would they look at horrors elsewhere? So that in the West, there's been this denial. If you walk through Trafalgar Square or Westminster Abbey in London, you see all these monuments to these mass murderers who killed thousands and tens of thousands of people in India, in Africa, and elsewhere in Asia. So the present horrors fit into a long history of Western colonialism and Western mass murder of indigenous peoples. And
You said it. Oh, sorry.
One final comment on the sadism. All you have to do is to watch the TikTok videos of Israeli soldiers dancing and laughing and chortling and dressing themselves in the clothes of Palestinians and mocking the Palestinians and making humor out of blowing up homes. I mean, it's sadism of the worst sort. And they don't even hide it. They put it on TikTok. The Western press doesn't reproduce these images, but anybody can watch them. They become sadists. All these other Israelis, they'll tell you about the propaganda and the brainwashing that happens almost right from birth. So that the sense of superiority and entitlement and fear and loathing of the Arabs is just brainwashed into them right from the beginning. It's like a cult. And
it works.
And it works really beautifully. And then, of course, Palestinian resistance doesn't always take beautiful forms. I mean, the Palestinians have done some terrible things. The suicide bombings, the killing of civilians. Now, why people are driven to that despair, that's another question. But from the Israeli point of view, this just validates and justifies what they've always been taught. And October the 7th, the killings of civilians, the abduction of people and all that, to the Israelis, this just justifies everything they've ever been told about the Palestinians. And what they did to create the Palestinians, they didn't consider that for a second. But I also think it's traumatizing to grow up in an environment like that. It's traumatizing to grow up in an environment where you're always told that you're always under threat. And that fear and loathing of the other is like the essential value. It's traumatizing to grow up like that. What does that do to you as a person? Not to mention, there's a lot of historical trauma in the parents and the parents of the parents of Israelis that they brought from Europe. And those traumatic imprints are passed on as well, quite apart from the Palestinian-Israeli struggle. There's just trauma that's passed on from generations. So you get this historical brainwashing and this immersion into a cult-like sense of superiority and loathing of the other, coupled with historical trauma passed on from generations, and you get people capable of doing what they're doing now.